Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
Wife told her husband she sailed on a cruise ship to Europe for work, but really. Today's story with a similar plot. Enjoy watching it. Captain Mike Weber of the U.S. Army surveyed the harsh landscape that he and his men had just cleared of enemy fighters. It had been an uphill battle against yet another group of radicals, following in the footsteps of their ISIS and Al-Qaeda predecessors. After the battle, he and his men cleared the area in preparation to return to their base in sub-Saharan Africa. After reporting to his battalion commander, Mike was handed a piece of paper. "Congratulations, Captain," the female corporal said. "You and your men have been given 30 days leave." "Thank you, Corporal," Mike said, smiling. "God knows they deserve it." Reading the orders, he noted that, in addition to the 30-day leave, they would spend an additional 15 days at Fort Benning to regroup, which included getting replacements for those killed or incapacitated. He also learned that one of his superiors, Brigadier General David Masters, would be temporarily leaving the Pentagon and traveling with them back into the country to primarily act as an observer. That's right, he thought to himself. The man is simply eager for his second star and probably wants to finally pin the combat infantry badge on his uniform. Damn the politicians in uniform. He returned to his area and ordered First Sergeant Roberts to gather his men. A few minutes later, the large man returned with a report. "The company is formed, sir," he said. Mike shook his head and walked toward the line as the first sergeant alerted the company. He made a sharp turn as Mike approached. "The company is at full strength, sir," he said. Mike nodded and took his place. He ordered the first sergeant and other company officers to take their places as well. As the officers moved forward, no greetings were exchanged, since they were still in a combat zone, and a greeting could attract the attention of a sniper looking for a quick target. "At ease," he said. After exchanging greetings, the dusty, dirty soldiers relaxed a little as they watched their commander. "Good news, guys," he said. "We have completed our mission for now, and the Army has awarded us 30 days leave." He paused as the soldiers expressed their gratitude. "After that, we have 15 days at Fort Benning, followed by a return trip." There were groans at this news. "So it's time to pack your things and head out. We leave tomorrow morning at 5:30, right after breakfast. That's all." He put the company on alert and ordered the first sergeant to disband the troops. He returned to his tent and began packing his duffel bag. Sitting down at his field table, he took out his tablet and tried to connect to a secure satellite channel. It was difficult here, as the geography of the area, combined with the minerals in the local rocks, created a sort of natural device to jam many of their satellite communications. Video communication was almost impossible, but short text messages usually got through. He tried to contact Lynette, his wife of 3 years, but was unable to. So, he sent a quick message telling her that he would be home on vacation in a day or two. His plan was to pick up his wife and then visit his parents in Springfield. His brother Brian had just graduated from West Point and was already home on short leave, awaiting entry into officer training before being transferred to Fort Huachuca, Arizona, where he would undergo advanced training as a military intelligence officer. Mike was the bigger and stronger of the two boys, which came in handy now, but Brian had always been smart. It was a little funny, he thought. While Brian looked up to his older brother and wanted to follow in his footsteps, the truth was that Mike admired his little brother for his cunning and problem-solving ability. When they were children, they often played army in the woods behind their parents' house. Brian would pretend to scout the area and gather intelligence on the enemy, which usually consisted of rocks that were the bad guys in their game. He would sneak up and then return, providing Mike with a map of the area and a suggested course of action. Mike, being the larger and stronger of the two, would then go in and destroy the enemy, with Brian providing the necessary support. He smiled at the memory. "God, I wish Brian were here with us," he said to himself. Then there was his younger sister Marilyn. She'd be 15 this month. Being the youngest in the family and the only girl, besides his mother, of course, she was allowed much more than any of the boys. This may also have been due to the fact that she was a spitting image of her mother at that age and was just as cunning. She grew up to be a real beauty, and he knew that someday she would become a disappointment for many guys. "I hope Dad has a good gun," he thought to himself. Of course, he was thinking about his parents, Chris and Chloe Weber. They had been married since 2002 and were literally a couple for life. He didn't know of any other couple that still showed as much passion for each other as his parents did. Many times as a child, he would return from school to find them in the pool, hugging each other tightly. He thought it was cute that, even in their 50s, they were chasing each other like a couple of teenagers in love. In the heat, they sometimes even called each other brother and sister, although they were not related. He knew the story behind it and thought it was cute, but still a little weird. His father, an accomplished photographer who began working for a local newspaper, had published many photographs in major news organizations and won awards for some of his work. He was also a best-selling author, having written several books, including one about a man who faced the death penalty after being falsely accused of adultery. Mike had read all of his father's books and was delighted with his talent. His mother became the head nurse in the maternity ward of the local hospital, where she had worked since college. He also knew that Amy Jenkins, the woman they all knew as Aunt Amy, would be there with her husband, Dr. Mark Jenkins. Amy was not their blood relative but was a close friend of their parents who had unofficially adopted her as their sister. His tablet vibrated, indicating a new message. Returning to the present, he read it twice. It was a short reply from his wife, informing him that she would not be able to be home and would instead be with her boss, who was going on a study trip to Europe. Damn, he thought. Of all the weekends she had to leave, this one? This happened more than once, and it honestly started to piss him off. To make matters worse, her boss was none other than Brigadier General Masters, who always seemed to find the worst possible moments to keep her away from him. Between trips to various military bases, meetings with officials on Capitol Hill, or overseas assignments, she seemed to be away from home more often than she was there. He wished she would tell him just once that she needed to be with her husband. After all, she wasn't in the military, and the general could always choose another personal assistant to organize his schedule. He began to wonder if there was more to it than she was saying. He had always trusted her, but looking back, he realized that their time together had been cut very short, and their nightlife had all but disappeared since she started working for the general. She had even been absent the night before he was sent on this mission, saying that the general had an important meeting with a senator who did not believe the army should send troops to this part of Africa. She didn't return home until around 4 a.m., just in time for his departure. They kissed briefly as they passed each other in the driveway, and he thought she smelled strange but couldn't put his finger on what. "Call me," she said as she entered the house, and that was all. No "I love you," no "be careful," or anything like that. He wondered if she really cared that he was about to get caught up in yet another operation in the never-ending war on terrorism that had begun in 2001. During this latest business trip, he received a total of 2 letters, 3 emails, and 4 short text messages. Nothing for his birthday, holidays, or their anniversary. The first email said that the general was keeping her very busy and that she might not have much time to communicate, but she still loved him and missed him. Yes, of course, he thought. On the other hand, he sent text messages or emails every day when he could, although he no longer expected a response. It was difficult, but he didn't even want to think about the possibility of betrayal. He had seen what it did to other soldiers on the battlefield, and it wasn't pretty. Now, she was supposedly on some mission with the general. Something didn't add up. He took out his tablet and opened the phone finder app. He entered his wife's number. In recent years, Congress had passed laws requiring trackers on all civilian cell phones so they could be easily found and tracked if the phone was turned on or had a battery installed. Its location could be tracked and recorded by the operator, who in turn provided access to the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Defense. The idea was to track potential terrorists. A few minutes later, a glowing red dot appeared on the map. He looked and couldn't believe his eyes. The point was approximately 150 miles east of the Bahamas. What the hell is she doing there? He wasn't stupid and knew that this was definitely not the route one would take for an official trip to Europe. According to the app, this was the last known location of her phone, recorded 2 days ago. Where the hell is she, and what is she doing? How could she send me text messages when her phone hadn't turned on for 2 days? Taking a closer look at her message, he noticed that it came from a Department of Defense device with tracking disabled for security reasons. Apparently, the system had forwarded messages to this device. He sent her a text reply. "I'm going to visit my parents when I get back, whether you're home or not. If they ask where my wife is, I'll just say that she thinks being with the general is more important than her husband's family. And why the hell is your phone stuck east of the Bahamas? Where exactly are you?" The answer came in a couple of minutes. Apparently, he had touched a nerve with her. "It's my damn job. I don't know what's wrong with the phone. I turned it off when it started glitching. Do what you have to do. I'll be home when I'm there. Tell them anything. Bye," she wrote. Damn work, he thought. For the first time since she took this job, he seriously considered divorce. He didn't need this trouble. Worse, he wondered if the general might have seen his message. He had heard rumors that the general had a knack for deliberately putting people who angered him into dangerous situations and wondered if the same fate awaited him. However, he had many unanswered questions. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough bandwidth here to do much more, but he vowed to get answers when he got home. He ate dinner and then packed his gear for the next day. Long after he went to bed, he continued to think about Lynette. The next day was hectic. After breakfast, the company pitched their tents, then packed and loaded their gear into one of the huge transport planes that would take them home. Once finished, First Sergeant Roberts formed the company for the final inspection and accompanied Mike as he checked each soldier and their equipment before leaving. These were professional soldiers, so he knew there would be no problems, but he had to follow Army protocol. He ordered the soldiers to load and watched as they entered the transport plane in squads. Once everyone was on board, he and the first sergeant made a final check before approaching the lead aircraft. "Go ahead, First Sergeant," Mike said. The big man nodded his head and walked inside. Mike always made sure he was the first one on the field and the last one off it. This was no exception. After looking around one last time, he entered the plane and took a seat on one of the canvas seats. Mike tried to sleep during the long flight home, but images of Lynette and the general kept flashing before his eyes. The plane landed at Joint Base Anacostia Bolling around 4:30 a.m. Having taken care of his men, Mike went home to the officers' quarters. The house was dark and looked the same as he had left it 6 months ago. As far as he could tell, no one had been in the house since he left. He put away his gear, showered, and changed into jeans and a t-shirt. Noticing that most, if not all, of Lynette's belongings and accessories were gone, he reviewed the mail. He noticed that although the bills had been paid, nothing else had been done. He also saw that letters he had sent to his wife remained on the table unopened. The food in the refrigerator was old and spoiled, some products were covered with green mold. He threw out the trash and cleaned the refrigerator so it wouldn't stink throughout the house. He checked his bank account to make sure everything was okay, and as far as he could tell, everything was fine. Lynette usually dealt with the bills, so he didn't really know what was normal. Luckily, the bills were paid automatically, and both his and Lynette's paychecks went straight into the account. It was a little after 8:30 when he called Lynette's office, hoping to get answers. "Sorry, Captain Weber," said the female voice on the other end. "Mrs. Weber and General Masters are both on vacation and won't be back until the end of the month." "On holiday?" Mike asked. "Are you sure about this?" "My wife said she and the general were on a study tour to Europe." No, I don't know about any study tour." "Both took leave around the same time and said they would be out of range," the woman said. "How long ago was this vacation planned?" Mike asked. "Let me see," the woman said. "Looks like they applied for leave 2 months ago. It says here that the general and your wife wanted to surprise you on your return from Africa for your services there. That's what they did, right?" Mike asked sarcastically. "Well, they really surprised me." "Did they leave any contact information?" "They both left your wife's personal phone number," the woman said. Great, Mike thought. To hell with it. He told the woman, "Thank you for your help." "You're welcome, sir," she said. "And welcome home." Mike thanked the woman and hung up. He sat down and began to consider his options. Divorce seemed almost inevitable at this stage. Sure, it could ruin his career, but his life was already in ruins. If he gave Lynette a hard time, the general and his friends on Capitol Hill might really set him up. He decided to call his father. "Hi, Mike," his father said, picking up the phone on the first ring. "Do you want to go to video? I haven't seen you in so long." Mike smiled. "Sure, Dad." "Wait a minute," he said, turning on the giant screen and pressing a button on the phone. His father's face filled the TV. "There you are," said the older man. "I see your tan." "Yeah, Africa was fun," Mike said. "Are you ready to come to us?" "Everyone's waiting and can't wait to see you," said Chris. "I'm leaving today or tomorrow," Mike said. "What happened, son? Where's this charming wife of yours?" Chris asked. The older man had always been able to read him like an open book. "I don't know where she is, Dad," Mike said. "She said she was on a fact-finding trip with General Masters in Europe, but her phone was last tracked east of the Bahamas. Her office says she and the General are on vacation until the end of the month, but doesn't know where she or her boss is. I'm leaving today or tomorrow alone." Chris looked sad after hearing the news from Mike. "I understand General Masters is in your chain of command," Chris said. Mike nodded. "And he's her boss." Mike nodded again. "That doesn't sound good, son. What are you planning to do?" he asked. "I don't know, Dad. I need information, but I don't know where to look or what to do," Mike said. "Okay, son," Chris said. "Don't worry. I know people who can help, so I'll talk to them. You rest and just come to us. We'll discuss this more when you arrive." "Okay, Dad." "Thanks," Mike said. "Say hi to everyone and tell them I say hi." "Absolutely, son," Chris said. "Drive carefully, and I'll see you in a day or two." They ended their conversation, and Mike began packing for his trip to Springfield. After packing everything, he checked the car to make sure it was ready to go, locked the house, and hit the road. It was still early, around 10:30 a.m., and he saw no point in staying another night in this place. After gassing up the car, he filled a thermos with coffee, bought a pack of small flavored cigars, a habit his father had instilled in him, and headed west. He drove nonstop, reaching St. Louis in 12 hours, stopping only for gas, food, and the bathroom. He still had about 3 to 4 hours of travel left, but he decided to stay at a motel and leave early so that he would be fresh enough when he arrived. He left early in the morning after a quick breakfast, and 4 hours later, arrived at the gates of his parents' house. When he arrived, he saw his mother and sister waiting for him at the door. At 52, approaching 53, his mother still looked quite attractive in her casual shorts and t-shirt, showing off her slender, well-trained dancer's legs. She still had a great figure even after having 3 children and could easily pass for someone 10 years younger. No wonder Dad always seemed happy, he thought. His much younger sister Marilyn, also in short casual shorts and a t-shirt, looked like a smaller version of her mother. They both ran to meet him when he got out of the car. His mother hugged him and kissed him on the cheek. Marilyn followed suit. "You were smoking those cigars again, weren't you?" his mother asked, smiling. "Just like your father, I swear. But still, it's great to see you. It's a shame Lynette couldn't come with you." "Me too, Mom," he said. Brian walked out of the house and shook his older brother's hand. Mike shook his hand and hugged him tightly. "I'll get your things," Brian said after they hugged. Mike patted him on the back. "Thank you, brother," he said. Upon entering the house, Mike received hugs from everyone, including his father, his grandparents, and Aunt Amy and her husband. After the greetings, everyone gathered in the living room. "How are you, son?" Chris asked. "It's been better, Dad," he said. "But seeing you all is a real blessing. I want you to know that we all support you no matter what you decide." "Okay," said Chris. Mike nodded. "Let me tell you what I found out after our conversation yesterday. I contacted my old friend Ron Weissman. He's an ace in research and has worked extensively with the Home Front Security Service. He told me this morning that he's pretty sure that what's going on with your wife involves the Home Front Security Service," Chris said. "Home Front Security Service?" Mike asked. "Never heard of it. What is it?" Chris's father answered, "This is the organization we did cleanup work for during the Skaggs administration. Remember," he said, turning to Chloe. Yes, I remember. It was that whole mess with the First Lady, he said. Trust me, son, you're better off not knowing the details. So Mike, are you ready to hear what Ron has to say? Chris asked. Yeah, Dad, I really need to know what's going on, Mike said. Chris called his friend, and soon Ron's face filled the huge 92-inch TV on the wall. Oh, there you are. You must be Mike Weber, Chris and Chloe's son, right? He asked. Yes, sir, Mike replied. Please, call me Ron. I work for a living, Ron said, causing laughter. Well, finding your wife in General Masters was easier than I thought. In the old days, it would have taken me a day or maybe two, but with the new technology and protocols we have now, it only took me a couple of minutes. Masters? Chris's father asked. David Masters. Is he a general now? Ron replied. Yes, he is, said Ron. Why, do you know him? I met him a while ago when he was a lieutenant colonel, Chris said. If this is the same person I met, he wasn't the nicest person back then either, he added, referring to Chloe's father. Remember that mess in Somalia? Chloe nodded. I still think he was behind it all, Chris said. He glanced at Marilyn and Chloe. Oh, sorry, girls, keep going, Ron. Mike, Ron said, well, it turns out your wife and the general are on a cruise ship heading to the Mediterranean. They booked the cruise about 2 months ago and departed from Miami about 3 days before you received your orders in Africa. They were pretty easy to find. According to the ship's manifest, they registered as General and Mrs. Masters. By the way, the general is married, but his wife was told that her husband would be in the field and out of range for at least a month. Thanks to the new rules, I even have photos of them signing on board. He said, and the screen split into 2 windows. On one side was Ron's face, and on the other was an image of General Masters and Lynette. Mike was furious. The general's hand was on Lynette's waist, and they looked like a happy couple. And that's not all, said Ron. I checked out this cruise ship, and it's one of those special cruises that are all the rage these days. It's an adult cruise, which means, firstly, there are no children, and secondly, there's no cramping on deck, if you understand what I'm talking about. Sorry, Ron, Mike said. I'm not into these new leisure activities. I'm a simple person, so can you explain that a little more? Of course, Mike, I understand, Ron said. This can be a little jarring, so I'll try to keep it simple and clear. These cruises are usually aimed at a wealthier crowd, those who have a lot of money and live a more colorful life. This particular cruise includes a lot of, shall we say, adult parties, without anything swimming areas, and the like. In short, it's practically floating debauchery. Everyone in the room gasped. Even Chris and Chloe, who were no strangers to public nudity or intim, were surprised that Mike's wife would engage in something like that with someone other than her husband. I'll send you a copy of the cruise's schedule of activities. You'll find it interesting, Ron said. In any case, the host company tries not to interfere with extracurricular relationships by requiring passengers to provide signed STD-free certificates and sign liability waivers, but as you can imagine, it doesn't always work. So is there evidence that my wife was intimate with the general? Mike asked. Ron nodded. I'm afraid so, Mike, he said. It took me a while to gain legal access to the ship's systems. I could have just hacked them, but I figured you'd need something that could be used in court. Luckily, the phrase "in the interests of national security" helps unlock doors and access secure cameras and video recordings. I was able to gain access to their onboard cameras and all of their archived videos. This is something that both DHS and the parent company require in such situations. I will not show anything explicit here, but I can forward it to your personal email if you want. Mike nodded and sent Ron his personal email address. Here's something you might find interesting, said Ron. An image of Lynette and David in bed appeared on the screen. Both were covered up, but it was clear that they were without clothes. Lynette was holding a tablet in her hands. Mike noticed a timestamp in the corner. Hold this for a minute, he said, taking out his tablet. He compared the timestamp on the photo with the timestamp of a brief correspondence he had had with Lynette while in Africa. They matched. He thought, she was in bed with Masters, texting her husband. It has a video attached, Ron said. Listen to what they say. The image switched to video, and everyone watched as Lynette angrily jabbed at the tablet. After a few seconds, she threw it on the nightstand and raised her middle finger angrily. Damn little thing, she said. Screw him and screw his family. Who is he anyway, to tell me what to do? I swear, I don't know what's worse, him or his stupid sister. David responded by stroking her hair. Mike looked at Marilyn, who looked ready to explode. Is that why you took the battery out of your phone after we left the Bahamas? He asked. She nodded. Yeah, I'm tired of hearing from his sister who wants to plan something for his and Brian's birthdays, she said. It's okay, honey, he said. You don't have to deal with them if you don't want to. Your husband will be returning to Africa in 45 days, and I will personally make sure he never returns. Lynette smiled. I don't want him to die, David, she said. I still have feelings for him. Well then, if you have feelings for him, why are you here with me and not him? Why not just divorce him and get it over with? He asked. You know why, David. He's not a bad guy and he's really good to me. It's just that all I ever hear is how wonderful and loving his parents are and how smart his siblings are. He always says how he's proud of his brother who graduated with honors from West Point. I can't really compete with that, she said. Besides, his family is damn rich. Between his grandparents and his father, who is a best-selling author, he'd have enough money to buy himself an island if he wanted. I'd be crazy to pass that up. Okay, whatever you say, David said. But if he gives you any trouble, let me know and I'll make sure he ends up in a hell he'll never get out of. You mean you won't come home? Lynette asked. He'll come home, but it's different now, David said. Don't worry. Friendly fire incidents happen all the time, David said. You can get his insurance by playing the role of a grieving widow. You can handle it, right? Lynette smiled. Yes, I can play the part for the cameras, she said. Now come here and give me some love. David smiled at her. Wrong, he said. This cruise must be expensive. Great question, Chris, Ron said. You're right, these cruises are extremely expensive. I haven't fully figured it out yet, but I already have several robots working on this task. When I find out, you will know too. Ron turned to Mike. Listen, Mike, this is all going to be a big shock to you, he said. Once we gather as many details as possible, you and I will discuss strategy for the future. I expect you to file for divorce. Absolutely, Mike said. Ron nodded. I think this is a wise move. However, dealing with the general will not be easy, he said. Normally, you could file charges under the Uniform Code of Military Justice and let the military police sort it out. The problem is that General Masters is very well connected. I'm talking about connections at the White House level. If you approach this poorly, you might lose physically. Mike nodded his head. You can't just fix your bayonets and attack. I understand, he said. Chris's father spoke up. Look, Ron, we still have connections in the intelligence community and the Secret Service, he said. If there's anything we can do to help, let us know. He has to pay. Ron nodded. Thanks. Maybe I'll take you up on your offer, he said. Guys, I'd better get back to work. Mike, I sent you a bunch of materials to review, and we'll keep you updated as we go. Thanks, Ron. I appreciate it, Mike said. Everyone else joined in as Ron ended the call. After Ron hung up, everyone sat there in shock at what they had just found out. Marilyn was the first to speak. I'm sorry, Mike, she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. For what? He asked. You didn't do anything. I called her hoping that we could plan something for you and Brian's birthday. I always loved her like a sister and thought she would be happy to do something with us, she said. I always wondered why she kept refusing. Now I know why. I hate her. Mike hugged his sister. It's okay, sis, he said. It's not your fault. She nodded her head. Got it, Mike, she said. His father walked up to Mike and put his hand on his shoulder. "Mike, listen, son," he said. "I know it's going to be hard for you. Just know that your whole family has your back. They dared to touch one of us, then they touched all of us. I know what kind of soldier you are, and I'm damn proud of you. But this guy Ron is right, you can't just go in guns blazing. You have to outweed them. We'll do our best, but if you need to talk, come over and we'll have a couple of beers and watch the game. Got it?" Mike nodded his head and smiled. "Got it, Dad," he said. "Thank you." "Hey Dad, what about me?" Brian said, smiling. "I wouldn't mind your home brew either." The older man smiled. "Well, hell, why not?" he said, laughing. "You graduated with honors from West Point. I think you deserve a couple of beers." He waved his hand as he and Chris's mother walked away. Chloe's parents also consoled Mike on his way out. Soon, it was just Chris, Chloe, Amy, and the 3 kids left. They sat there in shock until Mike's tablet vibrated, indicating incoming messages. He checked and saw 3 rather large emails from Ron. One message contained documents, while the other 2 contained videos. He opened the documents and began to read, his eyes widening as he looked over the ship's schedule of events. He turned to his parents. "Dad, Mom, can we talk?" he asked. Brian realized what was coming next and turned to Marilyn. "Hey, sis," he said, "I challenge you to a game of volleyball in the pool." She looked at him and smiled. "You're going to lose, Mr. West Point." "I'm not little anymore," she said, running upstairs to change. Brian followed her, seeing his brother's grateful look. "Of course, Mike." "What is it?" Chloe asked after the other 2 left. Mike handed her the tablet so she could look at the schedule. "Look at this," he said. "What does all of this mean?" Chris looked at the tablet with Chloe and Amy, who joined them. Their faces turned red, and their eyes widened. "Oh my God," Amy said. "We were wild when we were young, but this goes beyond that." Chloe nodded. "I agree," she said. The schedule included all sorts of imaginable and unimaginable entertainment. Mike turned off the tablet in irritation. "I've had enough," he said. Chris pulled out a card from his wallet and handed it to his son. "Here's the number for the toughest lawyer in the state," he said. "She hates cheaters with a passion, and I'm sure she'll handle your case just fine." Mike took the card and thanked his father. "Look, why don't you get settled in, and then join me in the backyard for a smoke break and a glass of wine? We can watch your sister beat Brian in the pool." Mike smiled. "Of course, Dad," he said. "It sounds great." He left to put his things upstairs, then called his lawyer and made an appointment for the next day. After he put everything away, he returned downstairs and joined his father on the veranda, enjoying a cigar while watching Marilyn and Brian chase a ball in the pool. "Your sister has gotten really good at this over the years," Chris said. "She made your mother and me sweat a few times." Mike laughed as Marilyn kicked the ball over the net, causing it to fall just out of Brian's reach. She started jumping and splashing water. "My game," she screamed. "I won!" Brian splashed her back, and they both started laughing and chasing each other around the pool, just like they did when they were kids. Mike smiled, enjoying the scene before him. For a moment, he forgot about his problems with Lynette. After dinner and a short celebration of the children's birthdays, Brian was in his room changing clothes and looking out the window that overlooked the backyard. He saw Mike heading into the woods with a clipboard and something else, a .45 caliber pistol strapped to his belt. It was the same old M1911 his grandfather had given him when he graduated from the Virginia Military Institute. Brian didn't want to get involved, but the presence of the gun bothered him. He had a pretty good idea where his brother was going, so he walked down into the forest. He stayed far enough away that his brother wouldn't notice him and quietly made his way through the woods. Sure enough, he saw Mike sitting on a large rock that was part of the fortress he and his brother had built as children. It was in a quiet corner of the forest and had become a favorite place for them to talk without prying ears. As he watched, he saw Mike looking at the tablet, apparently one of the videos Ron had sent. Then he saw something he never expected to see. His older brother, the strongest man he knew, was crying. He sobbed uncontrollably, his head in his hands, his body trembling. After a few minutes, Mike stopped crying and slowly pulled the gun out of its holster. Brian grew worried as he watched his brother insert the magazine and twist the bolt, allowing it to click into place. He knew there was now a bullet in the chamber. Brian knew he had to act, and fast. He came out from behind the tree where he was hiding and walked up to his brother. "This is not the way you should handle this weapon, Captain," he said loudly, causing Mike to look up, surprised. He extended his hand, moving closer to Mike. "Give me this before you get hurt." Mike looked at the gun before handing it to his brother. Brian took the weapon, removed the magazine, and cleared the chamber, leaving the bolt locked. He checked the chamber to make sure there was nothing else there before putting it down. He sat beside his older brother and looked at him. "What's wrong with me, Brian?" Mike asked. "Was I not good enough for her? What made her do this to me? To us?" Brian shook his head. "You're okay, Mike," he said. "Damn, you're the strongest and best person I've ever known. And as for Lynette, who knows why she does this?" He looked at the tablet and noticed that there was a video on it. "Is this from Ron?" he asked. Mike nodded. Brian picked up the tablet and looked at the video. He turned it off and put the tablet down, shaking his head. "Give it up, Mike." "Just get rid of it," Brian said. "She doesn't deserve you, and this general can go to hell." "She's not worth it," he added, pointing to the gun. Mike looked at his brother. Deep down, he knew the younger man was right. "When did you become so smart?" he asked, causing Brian to smile. "Well, you know, for years at West Point takes its toll," Brian said. "I'd say all the usual platitudes, but I know you've heard them before. Hell, you probably told them to your soldiers yourself, right?" Mike shook his head. "Yeah. No woman is worth that. You deserve better. Keep your head in the game, blah blah blah. It's all good until it happens to you," he said. He looked around at the familiar trees. "Do you remember all those times we used to come here and chase bad guys when we were kids? You always had my back then, and still do. Isn't that what brothers are for?" Brian asked. "You know, Marilyn is already planning to set you up with one of her young single teachers." Mike laughed. "She looks a lot like Mom, doesn't she?" he asked. "Yeah, that's right," Brian said. "Hey, what do you say we get out of here tomorrow and head into town to see what we find? Maybe we can have a couple of beers. Are you old enough to drink now?" Mike asked, laughing. "Trying humor, huh?" Brian asked in response, "Well, when you become a captain, you can too." "Why not?" "If Lynette can have fun, then so can we," Mike said. "That's the spirit," Brian said. "Come on, let's go home. It's late. Promise you won't say anything about this?" "About what?" Brian asked. Mike smiled and hugged his brother. "I got it," Mike said, holding out his hand for the gun. Brian gave him the weapon but kept the magazine. "I'll keep this if you don't mind," he said. Mike nodded, holstering his gun. Chloe and Amy looked up as the two brothers walked in through the back door. "There you are," Chloe said. "Where were you?" "We were starting to worry." "Just doing some men's unity," Brian said. "Yeah?" Chloe said, raising her eyebrows. She saw the gun on Mike's belt. "Did you find any bad guys to shoot in the woods?" "Well, you never know what might be lurking out there," Brian said. Mike smiled as he put the gun back in his father's gun cabinet. Brian placed the magazine next to him and locked the cabinet. "That's right," Chloe said. "Why don't you join us for a quick game of Monopoly?" she asked. "Is there even such a thing as a quick game of Monopoly?" Mike asked. Marilyn slapped his hand as she pulled out the game board and laid out the pieces and fake money. "Why not?" said Brian. "Marilyn owes me for that volleyball game, after all." "Careful, boy," she said. "I'm a banker, you know." "God help us," Brian said, smiling. They played Monopoly until late at night and then went to bed. The next day, Mike went to see a lawyer and began the process of divorcing his wife. The lawyer, Sally Chesterfield, was a real shark and nearly exploded when she heard Mike's story and watched some of the videos he showed her. The divorce will be as simple as possible, she said. They own no property and lived on base, so there's no mortgage or house to share. They have no children, so there's no child support. Lynette earns more than Mike, so alimony is not expected either. They'll both keep what they brought into the marriage, split their bank accounts in half, and keep their pensions. Mike insisted on filing for divorce on the grounds of infidelity and decided not to sue the general for alienation of affection, as those charges rarely work, the lawyer said. They decided to serve Lynette with a summons as soon as she got off the cruise ship in Miami. This should be pretty easy, Sally said. Let's see what your wife does after she receives the summons. What do you plan to do with the general? Well, there are some violations of the Criminal Code of Military Justice, but we're considering taking other action. We haven't decided on a course of action yet as we are still gathering more information, Mike said. Sally nodded. Good idea, she said. You're not planning on doing anything stupid to get revenge, right? Because if you do, it will really hurt your case. Mike shook his head. No, I don't plan to. I just want this traitor out of my life, he said. Okay, she said. What about the cruise line? Do you want to take any action against them? I don't know, Mike said. You're the lawyer. Do what you think is best. She nodded. Well, they did facilitate your wife's escapades without properly vetting them with the general marriage application. We can file a lawsuit, they'll probably settle out of court, but it could make you $1 million or $2 million. I'll leave it up to you, he said. Okay, she said. I'll have everything ready and arrange for the summons to be served when the ship returns to port. If you have any questions or any additional information beyond what we already know, call me. Okay, sounds great, Mike said. Thank you for your help. Happy to help, she said. And tell your father that I'm waiting for his next book. When he returned home, he received a text message from Ron, who wanted to discuss the situation with him and his parents at the earliest opportunity. Since they were already home, having taken time off to spend with family, Chris called and brought Ron up on the big screen in the living room. Good afternoon, Ron, Chris said. What do you have for us? Good afternoon, everyone, Ron said. I have some additional information that I think you'll find interesting. I've already sent Mike the latest footage from the ship, but it seems we've discovered something more. As you know, I've deployed robots to track down the funding for all of this. You heard the expression, follow the money, right? Well, it appears that at least some of this was funded by government funds, and it seems that the general and Lynette may have embezzled those funds. It also appears that some of the money came from foreign sources. I'll send you the documents confirming this. I also made initial inquiries to the military police. There's one more thing, Ron continued. I launched another group of robots to recognize the faces of the passengers in the video. It turns out that at least 2 of the passengers are agents of the group you're fighting in Africa. What? Mike asked. Are they related to General Masters? Ron nodded. I have identified at least 2 videos of Masters meeting with said passengers. The meetings are very short, and they do not spend much time together, but I did find one in which they appear to be exchanging something, money, possibly, or illicit substances. Maybe both. I'm not sure yet, but I launched software to improve these clips. So this is all an elaborate ruse so Masters can contact foreign agents? Chris asked. Perhaps, said Ron. I'll be able to say more once the video is processed. But for what purpose? Mike asked. Does Masters work for terrorists? I don't know yet, Ron said. But it definitely doesn't look good. I don't want to go to the intelligence services until I get something more concrete. Is it possible that Masters is working undercover? Chris asked. Ron shook his head. I doubt it, he said. The government would not use a well-known brigadier general and an untrained administrative assistant for something like this. The CIA and other agencies have resources that are much better suited for this type of operation. As I said, this is just speculation at this time, but it looks very suspicious. Is Lynette involved in this? Mike asked. Ron shrugged. It's possible, but I suspect she's just a cover and Masters is using her. That doesn't mean there isn't a romance between them, obviously there is, but it might just be the tip of the iceberg, he said. What do you suggest we do? Mike asked. Keep doing what you're doing, Ron said. I see you filed for divorce. That's good. Don't go near the general. I made sure a video of his activity with Lynette was sent to the general's wife, and she's very unhappy. She's filing for divorce too, so maybe they will both be served when the ship returns. I would advise you to return home a little earlier to prepare to meet her when she returns. Mike nodded. Got it, he said. When does the ship return? According to the schedule I have, June 15th, Ron said. Mike decided he could stay home for a couple of days to celebrate with his family and then hit the road. This would give him enough time to get his affairs in order before Lynette returned. Anyway, that's all I have for now, Ron said. If I find out anything else, I'll let you know. Thanks, Ron. We all appreciate it, Chris said before ending the call. Chris turned to his son. So, what are your plans? I'll stay a couple more days and then head home, Mike said. I need to make changes to my personnel file so that Lynette does not benefit in the event of my death, and take care of my personal affairs. After I confront Lynette, I will head to Fort Benning. Mike made the most of the next 2 days with his family. He spent the evening with his brother at a local club, drinking and dancing with several women, and treated his sister to dinner and a movie. He spent most of the rest of his time with his parents and Aunt Amy, and drank the homemade beer his grandfather offered. The visit ended with many tears, hugs, kisses, and promises to keep everyone updated on the latest developments. Mike took part in a final briefing with Ron, who confirmed that the general was secretly in contact with agents of the terrorists he fought with in Africa. Ron informed him that all the material collected had been handed over to the appropriate authorities, along with certain influential members of the current administration. It may take a while, but General Masters will be dealt with, Ron said. Let me know when you get back to base and I'll arrange for you to see 2 lovers being served with divorce papers if you want. Thanks, Ron. I'll take you up on your offer, Mike replied. After 2 days on the road, Mike found himself at his government home in Officer City and began to separate from Lynette. Ron kept sending videos. Mike went to his battalion's administrative office and changed the next of kin and beneficiary of his insurance, removing Lynette and specifying that, after all expenses were covered, the remainder should go to a college fund for Maryland. He then began packing his personal belongings to be shipped to Springfield, where his parents would store them until he needed them. He decided to leave electronics for now. The day came when Lynette's ship returned to port. Ron contacted him and gave him a web address where he could watch his wife and the general receive their divorce notices. He logged in and saw passengers disembarking from the huge ship. He noticed Lynette walking slowly down the ramp with David helping her, as she clearly had difficulty walking. When they reached the pier, 2 men in suits approached them. One of them asked Lynette to confirm that she was Lynette Weber. After she answered in the affirmative, he handed her a manila envelope and simply said, "You have been served with the documents." Another man dressed similarly approached David and repeated the procedure. After David confirmed that he was David Masters, he was also given an envelope. They looked inside and realized they had received divorce papers charging them with adultery. The packages also contained a small set of photographs, which were presented as evidence against them. Lynette howled as she looked through the papers and fell to the ground. Other passengers passing by looked at them but did not offer help. David screamed, swore, and made threats. "I'll kill this worm, your husband," he shouted. "He is dead, do you hear? Dead." After gathering himself, he helped Lynette up, and they left. As soon as they were out of sight, Ron called Mike. "Did you see this?" he asked. "Yes, I saw it," Mike answered. "I filmed it, especially when Masters threatened to kill you," Ron said. "I will include this in my report to the CID." "Great, thanks," Mike replied. "They came in on a private charter plane, so they'll probably return the same way," Ron added. "I expect them to be in your area in about 2.5 hours, give or take." "Thanks," Mike said. "This time is enough for me." After the call ended, Mike made sure his gun was loaded and placed it in a holster on his belt. Then he packed all his belongings for the trip to Fort Benning. He set about destroying any trace of his marriage to Lynette, cutting up the huge wedding portrait on the wall and breaking the set of his and hers glasses they had received for their wedding. He took her wedding dress out of the closet, along with her wedding photo album. He turned on the fireplace, not caring that the room would be warmer than usual at this time of year. Looking at his watch, he expected her arrival any minute. Indeed, she came in just as he was throwing her dress, veil, and wedding album into the fire. He looked at her with hatred in his eyes. "You finally returned home," he growled. She looked like she had lost at least 15 pounds. Her face was sunken, her eyes were red, and her face was blotchy. "God, you look terrible," he said. She howled as she saw her dress burning. She noticed a cut portrait on the wall and broken glasses, all that remained of her precious set. "What are you doing?" she cried. "I'm getting rid of everything that says we were ever married." "You are cheating, worthless trash," he said. She flinched away from him. He had never spoken to her like that before. "Why are you wearing your grandfather's gun?" she asked. "In case your lover tries to kill me. Isn't this what you wanted? For me to be dead and gone so you can collect my insurance? Go to hell. I changed everything so you won't get anything, not a cent," he said. "Why are you talking to me like that?" she cried, tears streaming down her face. "Because I hate you now. That's why," he shouted. "I only loved you, idolized you, worshipped the ground you walked on, and for what? For you to be with a general and go on a damn cruise with him? Is this how you want to be remembered? Was our marriage worth it to you?" "Mike, please don't talk to me like that," she sobbed. He looked at her. "You better get ready," he said. "I'm leaving for Fort Benning as soon as we're done here, and I hope I never see you again. The thought of you makes me sick." He stopped and took a breath before continuing. "Why are you crying? You knew what you were doing when you boarded that ship. You knew when you insulted me." "Please, Mike," she said. "Can't we just forget about this?" "Are you crazy?" he asked, raising his voice. "Look at the letters lying on the table, every letter I sent you from Africa. You didn't even read them. I can count on one hand the letters and emails I've received from you. Every time I turn around, you're gone. And then you lied to me and I found you on a damn cruise. Why? Just tell me one thing, why?" "Honestly, Mike," she said, "honesty from you would be a nice change." "I honestly don't know," he said. "You were always away, and David was nearby. He showed attention and care. Everything just started spinning. And who do you think sent me and my people to all these places, huh?" he asked. "You knew that I would serve when you married me. Damn it, you work with him at the Pentagon. What were you thinking? That I deliberately forced our enemies to declare war on US in order to leave for months? What's going on in your head? Sometimes I don't even know, Mike. I'm really sorry." "I really am," she said. "Yes, you really are pathetic," he said. "How long has all this been going on?" "I do not know exactly. Maybe 7 or 8 months, she replied. Mike nodded. This coincided with his observations. "Does anyone else know about this?" he asked. "My family," she said. "Your family knows now too," he said. "I wasn't going to let you put the blame on me, so I told them everything. Your friends and some others." "Oh my God, did you tell my family?" she asked. He nodded. "Yes. I told them. I even sent them some photos as proof," he said. She started crying again. "Did you send the photos?" she asked. "I will never get over this. You weren't supposed to know. Nobody was supposed to know. Did you tell David's wife?" "No, I didn't contact her. Someone else did," he said. "Sign the documents and send them back. There is no alimony, you keep yours and I keep mine. We'll divide the bank account in half, and everyone keeps their pension savings. Since we are still legally married, you can stay here until the divorce is finalized. Then you will have to remove all your property. I don't want to leave anything here. For now, you're working, so I think you can handle it. Unless, of course, they decide to investigate your little adventure with Masters." He took off his wedding ring and threw it to her. "What is this?" she asked. "I don't need this anymore. You can leave it, sell it, eat it, I don't care, he said. Do you want my rings? She asked. He shook his head. No, they will only remind me of you. Keep them, throw them away, whatever. I don't care. I just want you out of my life. Can we ever be friends? She asked. He shook his head again. I don't know. Honestly, I don't think so right now, Lynette. I loved you with all my heart and you tore it apart. You could have put a bullet in me. Friends don't do that to each other. Can you at least forgive me? She asked. Again, I don't know, he said. Maybe one day. It's too painful to even think about right now. Sorry, Mike, she said. Yes, you already said that, he replied. Listen, I better go. Sign the papers and send them back. Tell your lover if he tries to touch me or my family, it will be his last mistake. Don't call me, don't write, I don't want to hear from you anymore. He stood up and walked towards the door, then turned to her. Lastly, Marilyn, you know, my silly sister, as you called her, loved you and considered you the big sister she never had. She gave you a message, he said. Which? Lynette asked. Burn in hell, he said. Goodbye, Lynette, he said, closing the door and leaving her crying on the floor. He got into the car and drove off, stopping at a motel that night. He called his parents and Ron, who updated him on the situation. How are things with your wife? Asked Ron. As expected, Mike said. She doesn't look well. Sorry to hear that, said Ron. I'm putting the finishing touches on this, but my CIA contact told me that the man Masters met on the ship is a known terrorist operative with dubious ties to the Middle East, a very bad person. It appears their trip was paid for with taxpayer funds mixed with laundered money from Africa. So General Masters worked with terrorists? Mike asked. I can't speak on an unsecured line, but let's just say their little trip attracted the attention of a lot of very important people, Ron said. Got it, Mike said. Let's see how things go further. Thanks for all your help, Ron. I really appreciate it. Can I do something for you? I owe you a lot. No, just come home safe and sound, okay? Said Ron. I'll try, Mike said, ending the call. The next day, he continued to Fort Benning, arriving late in the evening. He checked into bachelor officer quarters and settled in for the night. The next day, he met up with the advance party and found First Sergeant Roberts, who had arrived a day earlier. They spent several days making sure everything was ready for the company's arrival. Mike reviewed the personnel files of the replacements. Apparently, these were good soldiers who would fit well into the team of old-timers. The company arrived on time, completing its 30-day leave. Mike and First Sergeant Roberts spent several days conducting training jumps and maneuvers. Mike met with the recruits for one-on-one interviews and was pleased to learn that his initial assessment was correct. On the day of the flight to Africa, General Masters approached Mike, pretending to be John Wayne, with a condescending smirk on his face. I hope you had a good holiday, David said. Mike didn't answer. Have you talked to your wife lately? Masters asked. Mike looked at him with hatred in his eyes. Masters noticed this and turned to face him. Okay, Weber, he said. Why don't we take off our titles and sort things out like men, he suggested. No, Mike answered. Don't play these games with me. This star is the only thing keeping you alive right now. David was shocked when Mike continued, let's make one thing clear, FS, my team, generally, these people obey my orders. You're just an observer here, so don't forget that. You're not a tactician, you're just a politician in uniform. You know it, I know it, and more importantly, the soldiers know it too. As soon as we board the plane, you'll be part of my team. You will obey my orders exactly and do your part just like everyone else. If you disobey, interfere, or disrespect me in front of my people in any way, or mention your dirty affair with my future ex-wife, I swear to God, I will personally kill you on the spot. Understood? David's eyes were wide with fear. Do you understand me, soldier? Mike shouted. David nodded, truly afraid of the big man in front of him. Yes, he finally answered. Yes, what? Mike asked. Yes, sir, David replied, realizing that he had been beaten by a more worthy man. Mike nodded. One more thing, he said. Because it's my team, I am always the first on the field and the last to leave it. This is no exception. This isn't the damn Pentagon, so protocol be damned. You get on the plane after me and sit with me and my people, okay? David added, just one question. Which? Mike asked. Honestly, have you been in contact with my wife about the cruise? David asked quietly. Mike shook his head. Honestly, General, no. I didn't contact you, and I didn't even try to contact your wife. You can check the metadata yourself if you want proof, Mike said. I heard from Lynette that you have a video from the cruise, David said. Yes, there is, Mike answered. Is it possible to get a copy? Asked David. All videos have been handed over to the appropriate authorities, Mike said. Your wife also has copies, so perhaps your lawyer should contact her lawyer. Got it, David said. Thank you for your frankness. You're welcome, General, Mike said. First Sergeant Roberts approached them and saluted. David, as the senior officer, returned the honor. Soldiers on board the plane, sir, Roberts said. Mike nodded. Thank you, First Sergeant, he said. Let's join them. The three men walked towards the plane with equipment on their backs. First Sergeant Roberts entered the aircraft first, followed by David. Mike looked around to make sure everything was in order and climbed aboard, taking a seat with David and the First Sergeant. A few hours later, the plane landed on a dusty strip near a temporary field camp. As the soldiers disembarked, Mike noticed mortar fire in the distance and heard the familiar sounds of rifle fire. The colonel approached Mike and showed him the map. We've been under fire all day, Captain, he said. Our patrols report that a large convoy is moving from the north. I know you just arrived, but I need your men to intercept it and buy us some time. The regiment is moving from the east, but it won't be there for some time. I've ordered the engineers to place your equipment here, near the runway, and you can return for it after you've dealt with the convoy. Can you handle it? Mike nodded. Yes, sir, he said. He signaled to the first sergeant and his platoon leaders. David began discussing the situation with the colonel and started to leave when Mike called him back. General, we need you to come with us to better assess the situation, he said. The colonel noticed the reaction on David's face. Obviously, he didn't want to get close to real combat, and the colonel could see the fear in his eyes. David hesitated for a few seconds before the colonel spoke. Captain Weber is right, General, he said. He'll need all the help he can get. David nodded, realizing that he would not be able to sneak out of this situation as he had done before. He turned to Mike and the others gathered around him. Mike looked at him with a look that could melt lead. After consulting with the other officers, Mike signaled for the company to form up. He looked at David, ready for a walk in the park. Are you ready? He asked. David's face was white with fear, but he nodded. Okay, Mike said, taking his place at the front of the loose formation with David, the first sergeant, and the radio operator. He looked back at his men. They knew what awaited them, and they were ready. He smiled proudly. Follow me, he said, turning around. Hooray, he heard from the assembled soldiers. They moved quickly, following the road indicated on the map. David was a little out of shape, unlike the hardened Special Forces soldiers behind him. However, he refused to let them gain the upper hand and kept pace with Mike, breathing heavily. Their target was only 2 kilometers north of the camp, so it wasn't far to go. Mike knew that the soldiers in the camp were fighting a largely defensive battle, so he decided to take a chance by splitting the company to attack using the classic hammer and anvil maneuver. He hoped this would surprise the enemy and stop their advance. He also knew that the regiment approaching from the east would not be able to engage in battle for several hours. He gave orders, and the company split up, one group going to the east side of the road, the other to the west. They approached the call, and when Mike received confirmation that the second formation was in place, he gave the order to attack. His soldiers rushed down the slope, firing as they went. The enemy, stunned, did not know what to do. Some fired back, but others did exactly what Mike expected. They turned and ran east, straight into the arms of the waiting formation that unleashed hell on them. Mike stopped the advance and ordered his men to take cover behind a stone wall overlooking the road. They took up their positions and opened fire on the enemy below. Some of the enemy soldiers attempted to flank them, but Mike's soldiers adapted and stopped them. Things soon calmed down as most of the enemies ran back down the road from whence they came. The colonel, pleased with what he had heard, ordered Mike to hold this section of the road until the regiment was in position. They remained in place and held their position despite the fact that the enemy tried several times to break through with small trucks armed with machine guns and Iranian grenade launchers. During a brief lull in the fighting, Mike looked back and saw David shivering next to a fallen tree trunk. He approached the general and noticed that he had not even inserted a magazine into his rifle. Mike pulled out a gun and knelt next to David, despising him for his public display of cowardice. "Get your 5th place on the line now, General, or I swear I'll blow your brains out right here," he hissed. David looked at Mike, his eyes filled with fear. "Damn coward," Mike spat. The radio operator approached Mike. "Sir, you have a secure call from the States," he said. "What now?" Mike thought. He put on the headphones that the corporal had given him. Through the eyepiece, he saw a familiar man sitting at a large wooden table in the Oval Office. "Captain Weber," said the President of the United States. "Yes, sir," Mike replied. "This is President Hastings." "Is General Masters near you?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Mike replied. The President nodded. "Okay," he said. "I know you're busy right now, but this is a direct order from your Commander-in-Chief. You understand?" "Understood, sir," Mike said. "Very good," said the President. "I want you to arrest General Masters immediately. I'm sending you an arrest warrant. It should appear on your field printer any second. Questions?" "No, sir," Mike said. "We're under fire right now, but I'll take care of it personally." The President nodded. "Thank you, Captain Weber. Have a good hunt." The call ended, and a sheet of paper began to come out of the printer. Mike took it and read it. Seeing a soldier with a roll of duct tape on his belt, he motioned for him to follow him. Approaching David, Mike called, "First Sergeant Roberts, General Masters," he said, turning to David, "By order of the President of the United States, I am arresting you for violation of the rules of military justice, embezzlement of government property, fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, espionage, aiding the enemy, and treason." He looked at the first sergeant. "Disarm him," he ordered. "Corporal, tie his hands behind his back and keep an eye on him. Don't even let him move." "Yes, sir," the corporal replied, tying David's hands behind his back with duct tape. Mike turned to the first sergeant. "First sergeant, get this worm out of my group as soon as possible," he ordered. Roberts nodded. "Yes, sir," he replied. At that moment, Mike heard a thud behind him. Turning around, he saw that a grenade had fallen to the ground. It was one of those new Iranian grenades he had heard about. Mike jumped onto the explosive device without thinking, and the soldiers around him quickly fell to the ground. The battle continued, and the soldiers were victorious, a final tribute to the commander they respected and admired. A day later, a family in Springfield learned that their son had been killed in action. Officers were comforting the family when the phone rang. Chris turned on the ringer on his large TV, and a man with 4 stars on his shoulders appeared on the screen. "Mr. and Mrs. Weber," he said, "my name is General Johnson. I am the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff calling you from the Pentagon. I wanted to personally express my condolences on the loss of your son." "Thank you, General." "We appreciate it," Chris said, wiping away tears. "Mr. and Mrs. Weber, the President has taken a personal interest in your son's death." "It seems he spoke to Captain Weber a short time before his death," the general said. "I cannot discuss this conversation, but I can say that the President insists on expedited consideration for the Medal of Honor for your son. We are all indebted to you and your son." "We appreciate it, General," Chris said. "What kind of medal are we talking about?" "The Medal of Honor," the general said. "It looks like your son jumped on a grenade, saving the lives of many other soldiers. He gave his life so that others could live. Got it, Chris said. I hope to see you at your son's funeral. If you don't mind, the general said, I would consider it an honor to personally escort your son from Dover. That would be great, General. Thank you, Chris said. The general said goodbye and ended the call. Later that day, the whole of America learned about it. Lynette sat in the former living room she had shared with her husband. She hadn't eaten much since returning from the cruise, and the house was just as Mike had left it, with the ashes of her wedding dress and a photo album in the fireplace. A few days after returning from the cruise, she was suspended from her job at the Department of Defense, pending an investigation into her and David's actions. She was not told anything more and was warned that she could expect a visit from various agencies. While watching the news, she heard an anchor reporting breaking news from the front in Africa. Today, we learn that a high-ranking general has been arrested for alleged conspiracy with the enemy in Africa. Brigadier General David Masters has been arrested on a number of charges, including conspiracy to murder, embezzlement of government property, and treason. It is unknown whether the charges are related to a cruise he reportedly went on with an administrative assistant in June. Lynette gasped as David's photo appeared on the screen. The presenter continued his report. His companion on this trip, a woman who worked with Masters, is also considered a person of interest in this case, he said. Lynette's eyes widened. She knew nothing of the murder plot and was not aware of any activities other than her infidelity to her husband. In related news, a soldier named Captain Michael Weber died in action in Africa after reportedly jumping on a grenade to save the lives of his comrades, the anchor said. An image of Chris's father appeared on the screen, speaking to a reporter. This is so much like our Mike, he said, tears streaming down his face. He was an excellent soldier and a wonderful person. We will miss him. The broadcast returned to the presenter. AWT News interviewed Captain Weber's father, Pulitzer Prize winner and New York Times best-selling author Chris Weber, about his son, the anchor said. His death has left a huge void in our hearts. No parent should have to bury their child, Chris said, sitting next to his wife, Chloe, both wiping away tears. The report returns to the presenter. What do you think of our story today? I feel sorry for the husband who has such a deceitful wife. What's your opinion? Write in the comments. See you in the next video.